went from Saints to, he became Comland or Comstrat. The one who really had the biggest heartburn was Tom Fargo, who was at the Pacific at the time. As Compaq, he objected to being called a defunct computer company, but you have to deal with the hand you're dealt, I suppose. As Thomas noted and Ed mentioned, I came to the space involvement via a slightly different route as the UCP change began to unfold, driven by some early imperatives. And I worry even now that we're beginning to forget the tenor of those times. Those of us that were a part of it. The Space Commission report obviously was on the table. The nuclear posture review had just been completed and talked in terms of deterrence, and now we're broader than nuclear. The events of September 11th that Ed spoke so well of, and the follow-on global war on terror, all of that contributed to the creation of the Unified Command Plan Change 2002 Change 1, because there were two changes actually, as we all recall, to that. It's important to note that Ed and I worked hard on this together. I couldn't have had a better partner in bringing the organizations together, but also bringing the community together. I spent a lot of time over here with Bill Tutt, Elliot, and interfacing with the community, working the human side of this piece, because we felt it was very, very important to convey what we genuinely and passionately and still believe, and that's the importance of space. And this was not a hostile takeover. This was a coming together of equals. In fact, Ed and I agreed that the way we would do this, the way it ultimately unfolded, was we disestablished both commands. They went away, and then from those elements we reassembled two new commands. In his case, Northern Command, and in my case, Strategic Command. We kept the name just to save a lot of money in Omaha on road signs, but it also allowed us to redefine the concept of strategic, taking it in new directions, and so we worked hard to make that as good a transition as it can be. There's lots of debate. I suspect there probably is still some today about whether we got it exactly right, but it was clear that we had to change. We had to move in new directions. There were new roles. Stratcom now has space operations, space support, land-based missile defense, the military lead for computer network defense and computer network attack, and obviously strategic deterrence. And so all of these things had to move forward. Ed and I often have this conversation about the uniqueness of space and how we have to deal with that. We probably come at it from different directions and hopefully meet at something close to midpoint. But as I began to explore the nuances of space and its control, I was a bit taken by the terms that were applied to the dramatic expertise that had existed and developed here over decades in Colorado Springs. And my colleagues from outside this effort would ask me often how I was getting along with either the space priesthood or the space mafia, which certainly spans the moral spectrum, if nothing else. And the reality is that we got along just fine, and we put it together, I think, as quickly as it could be effectively done. There's been a UCP change since then, 2008. We continue to modify and address it as well we should. Change 2 to the UCP brought 4 previously unassigned missions. Nobody ever had them before. They came to the newly constituted Strategic Command. The UCP change was signed on the 10th of January 2003 and was to be effective the 10th of January 2004. We had a year to get it done. Those areas, I don't have time to go into detail, but included Global Strike, DoD Information Ops, Global C4ISR, a term that does a disservice to every one of those 7 elements that comprise it, and integrated missile defense. And so we began to work the process, and we worked it hard. This was billed, perhaps unfortunately, as something that was transformational. But heck, in 2001, as we all recall, everything was transformational. I once saw a briefing on a transformational plan for the procurement of small caliber ammunition. For heaven's sakes, they're just bullets, you know. And my point in the headquarters, I did not allow the use of the word transformation in any slide or any presentation. The logic was, if you had to tell people you were transformational, you probably weren't. But when you look back on what we did and the speed with which we did it, you know, the remarks of Abraham Lincoln come to mind since I once commanded a ship that bore his name. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. As our case is new, so must we think anew and act anew. And I'm proud to say, with my partner to my right, we did that. And that change continued. Now, people talk about change being hard. Change isn't hard. Okay, change is not hard. We all change. Organizations change, roles change, relationships change. Heck, I once had hair. Change is necessary and I would argue inevitable. Some from Omaha remember I used to quote the Plains Indians saying, you never cross the same river twice. You come to the ford a day later, it looks like the same river, but it's really not because it's flowed by. Well, that's fine. It's really the rate of change and the acceleration of change that's hard and creates friction. For the engineers in the room, it's that first and the second derivative that get us. And we certainly had some friction along the way. It wasn't between us or within our organizations necessarily, but there were some interesting stakeholders, or people who thought they were stakeholders in this process. And then there was what I categorized in the broad bucket of the merely interested, who felt that they had an obligation to put their 2 cents in the process. When I got to Washington, as Ed and I went for a commander's conference, one of the civilians there approached me and asked, well, how does it feel to be the czar of all the strategic and space resources? And I kind of bristled a bit. First off, I didn't like the term czar, and I realized why when Larry Welch talked to me about it a day or two later. He said, you need to remember something about czars. And I said, oh yeah, what is that? And he says, well, the nobles ignore them and the peasants kill them. So it reinforced my aversion to the term. Okay. I don't know if you've ever gotten a letter from the President of the United States, and I'm not name dropping. I did, to make all this UCP stuff happen. I suspect Ed did as well. Mine was very specific. It was a paragraph. It said Admiral Ellis will combine these 2 commands and take over 4 previously unassigned missions. He will complete this in 1 year, and if he does not complete it, he will report back to me and tell me why he has not. Well, that's accountability. I understood that, recognizing their stakeholders, the Joint Staff generously agreed to collate from all of the stakeholders cautions or caveats that they thought ought to be part of this process going forward. And so, while I had a half-page letter from the President, 5 months later, the Joint Staff delivered me a 26-page single-spaced document telling me what the President had meant to say. But nonetheless, we were able to make the 1-year deadline. We were able to bring them together in a way that I think continues to serve the nation. There are other things that happened during my tenure, like the war in Iraq and things like that. I don't have time for that discussion. But I'm a great fan of Winston Churchill, who once said, don't argue about the difficulties will argue for themselves. And indeed they did. Thank you.